Wipe this pathetic planet from the face of the galaxy.
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So today is the 20-year anniversary of one of the most highly regarded games in the Star Wars series, the now legendary Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, released in 2003, developed by BioWare. Those of you who saw my top 100 favourite video games list that I made last year, link in description, will probably know that Knights of the Old Republic actually made it into my top 10. It's a game that I've personally played on many occasions, and one that I always found to be highly addictive and highly thought-provoking. So does the game still hold up today? And is it as great as I remember? Let's talk about it. With the game being 20 years old now, it gives me the perfect opportunity to finally give it a long, in-depth review. Let's get started. So as I'm sure most of you already know, the game is a third-person action-adventure RPG with a turn-based combat system, as well as a ton of dialogue and choices within the story. This is a game that has become pretty much iconic, and it really set the standard for RPGs of its kind back in the day. The game's story is a pretty interesting one. It takes place several thousand years before the events of the Star Wars movies. The story is a pretty deep and complex one, and I won't get into too many spoilers, but what I will do is give a bit of backstory. It's worth pointing out that a lot of the game's story is actually told to you in the game through specific encounters with characters. You'll be able to speak to these characters and ask questions about the events of the game and the events prior to it, and you will often get varying accounts of these events, and the game gives you information bit by bit. And the more of the game you play, and the more characters you interact with, the more information about it you'll get. So prior to the events of the game, the Republic is in turmoil. For many years they were engulfed in a conflict with a race of warriors known as the Mandalorians, who attempted to wipe out the Republic by waging war on the entire galaxy. Due to the Mandalorian threat, the Republic petitioned to the Jedi Council for aid. When the Council refused to get involved in the war, the Republic seemed on the verge of defeat, until a Jedi Knight named Revan decided to go against the Council's wishes. He, along with his apprentice Malak, decided to host a secret meeting, convincing scores of young Jedi to join them in aiding the Republic. Once Revan and his followers assembled, the tide of war quickly turned. Revan's skill in battle, as well as his incredible power, led to a resounding victory for the Republic, effectively annihilating the Mandalorians and even slaying their leader Mandalore in single combat. When the war ended, Revan, Malak and the Jedi, as well as the Republic soldiers who served him, mysteriously vanished, until 5 years later, when Revan returned with a huge fleet of starships, declaring himself the Dark Lord of the Sith, and waging all-out war on the Republic, just as the Mandalorians did before him. Long story short, Revan, along with his now fallen Dark Jedi supporters, appeared to be winning the war, until a young Jedi woman named Basta Lashan was sent by the Jedi Council to aid the Republic in battle, using a unique force ability called Battle Meditation. In addition to this, Bastila led a strike team on a mission to capture or kill Revan, and finally end the war. When Bastila and her team managed to corner Revan, Malak, who had been Revan's loyal apprentice and friend, suddenly grew ambitious and turned on his master, ordering his ship to fire upon Revan's command bridge, hoping to take out both Revan himself and Bastila's team. Bastila and her team survived the blast, but Revan was hit, and was from that point on assumed to be dead. With Revan gone and the Sith leaderless, Malak took up the mantle as the new Dark Lord of the Sith. Bastila and the rest of the Jedi continued to aid the Republic, using her battle meditation, in the war against Malak and his Sith fleet. This brings us to the events of the game itself. Just like all the best RPGs, you get a character creator. This allows you to customize your own character's physical appearance, as well as choose a specific class. You have 3 classes to choose from: a soldier, which is a more combat based class, allowing you to develop better fighting skills a Scoundrel, which is a more stealthy, strategic class, and a Scout, which is more of a balance between the other two. Me personally, I pretty much always start with the Soldier class, since it's what I'm used to, but I digress. In addition to your class, you can also choose your character's starting abilities, which will pretty much depend on how you prefer to play the game. You can also choose your character's skills, but I wouldn't worry too much about these, since the characters you will unlock in your party will later be able to handle tasks that require these skills. What you'll notice right away is that you can invest points into certain skills and abilities, depending on the type of character you want to play as. If you want to be more of a fighter, using combat to resolve situations, then you can focus on those skills. If you want to be more of a pacifist and a negotiator, you can invest in speech. This will allow you to resolve more situations peacefully, and will open more interesting dialogue options. Once you're finished with the character creator, the game can now begin. The game begins aboard a Republic ship called the Endor Spire, which is engaged in battle in the skies above the planet Taris. The protagonist wakes up in one of the ship's bunk rooms. You're told by your bunkmate that you're a newly recruited member of the crew, who was chosen by Bastila herself due to your character's skills and experience as a soldier. It's here that you get an introduction into the game's dialogue and RPG elements.
Now hurry up! We have to find Bastila. We have to make sure she makes it off the ship alive. Bastila is the commanding officer on the Endar Spire.
You also get a short tutorial that familiarises you with the game's controls and overall gameplay, as well as the combat. The game's combat is turn-based, meaning you enter into a one-on-one battle with an enemy, and can simply command your character to perform specific actions, rather than assume direct control of the character. You can also switch to other members of your party at any time during both combat and regular gameplay, and do the same. The combat system takes a bit of getting used to, but once you're used to it, it's a blast, and it really is fun. Great RPG combat that you don't see much of nowadays. Once the tutorial is over, you escape the ship in one of the escape pods, and crash land on the nearby planet Taris. Your character blacks out and wakes up on Taris several days later. This is where the game really begins. What I love about the game's opening is how well it engages the player. This game makes it perfectly clear that how you approach the story and the world around you is entirely your choice. And I'd say that the element of choice is one of the things that really stands out about the game. In this game, you don't have to be the good guy. If you want to, you can be a straight up villain.
Well, now you're just punishing yourself.
How this works is that throughout the game, you will be given various moral dilemmas. Characters will often ask you for help. These requests can come from both innocent civilians who need a helping hand.
Thank you. I owe you my life. Those bounty hunters are going to take me away and kill me.
Or even criminals who will offer you a reward to help them facilitate a particular crime.
You're here about that? I guess Zax must have mentioned me to you at the bounty office. Fair enough. I don't care who takes her out, just so long as the job gets done.
These choices and tasks will often conflict with one another, and will lead your character down a different path. This also applies to the game's dialogue. By choosing good dialogue options and being a nice guy, you can set yourself down the path of the light. By being a straight up asshole and a brute, insulting, disrespecting, and in some cases even threatening NPCs, you go the opposite path. How this works is you get light side points for being good, and dark side points for being bad.
You have a cure? Please give it to me, please, quickly, before it's too late. Quickly.
Sometimes the choices that lead to either side aren't clear, and there is a little bit of moral ambiguity, but not much if truth be told. Gain enough light side points and eventually you'll be able to unlock certain powers and abilities, as well as perks that are exclusive to the light side. Likewise, the dark side comes with its own set of abilities and perks, giving you an incentive to replay the game when you've finished, and make different choices throughout the story. Some of the dialogue choices you get are absolutely hilarious.
Thank you, kind sir. I hope you will express your appreciation to Davik. He often rewards those slaves who perform their duties well. Is there anything else you require?
As the game's story progresses, you will come across a whole host of characters to interact with. Some of these characters will even be unlocked as a companion who will join you in your quest. What's cool about this is that each character, in addition to having their own weapons, skills and abilities, will even have their own personalities and worldviews, some of which will conflict with one another.
We try to stop the Sith, but don't start thinking this war, your war, is more important than any other war just because you're in it.
That's an interesting theory, but I don't buy it. The Republic stands for something. It stood for something for 15,000 years, and if it falls, everything will change forever.
You believe whatever you need to get through this, Sonny.
The game allows you to have full, interesting and in-depth conversations with each of your companions, and some of the dialogue here is absolutely fantastic, and sometimes even thought-provoking.
Love doesn't lead to the dark side. Passion can lead to rage and fear, and can be controlled. But passion is not the same thing as love. Controlling your passions while being in love, that's what they should teach you to beware. But love itself will save you.
One of the first characters you team up with is KOTOR, a Republic war veteran and a pilot who helps you escape the Endar Spire in the beginning. You'll learn pretty early on that Koth is a character with a tragic past, who lost his family as a result of the war between the Republic and the Sith. And as a result of this, Koth refuses to trust anybody, and is in a constant state of paranoia.
When I think of all the men who betrayed us, the one that stands out above all of them is the one that I respected the most, Saul.
He's a character who is the quintessential good guy, and a genuine hero, who you get to bond with throughout the game. And depending on how you treat him, and what choices you make throughout the story, your friendship with him will really develop. One of the most prominent characters in the game is Bastila Shan, the young Jedi who I mentioned earlier. She's a character who's pivotal to the story, and in the beginning she really clashes with you.
I would like to know what happened after you crashed on Taris. I'm curious as to what you and Karth were doing before we all joined forces. I managed to free myself, as I recall. In fact, if I hadn't been there, Brejik and his thugs might have killed you in that fight. It's probably more accurate to say that I rescued you.
What I found interesting about Bastila is she's a very complex and flawed character. In fact, I'd go as far as to say she's one of the most well-written characters in Star Wars. She's a character who is skilled and competent, but at the same time extremely vulnerable and emotionally unstable.
Fun? Fun? Driving me insane is your idea of a good time? You are a very odd man. Do you know that? I simply don't know how to deal with you. All I want to do is help you, but you seem determined to drive me mad. I don't know if I should be outraged that you keep joking about serious matters, or if I should be grateful that you can always lighten the mood.
She's also, if truth be told, a bit of a fool, whose pride and arrogance is her undoing. I may actually do a full character profile for Bastila in a separate video one day, because she really is very interesting. She also serves as a potential love interest for the protagonist, and some of the dialogue involving her is actually pretty based.
Mutual attraction. I never said... It's just an expression. Whatever our feelings... whatever your feelings, you have to try to ignore them. Don't let this complicate things.
She's also very funny at times.
A little jolt of the Force to trip up some jerk who's ticking you off?
I would never use the Force for such petty and trivial revenge. The mere thought of it's preposterous.
Oh, come on. There's gotta be times when you've thought about it. Don't be so stuck up. You can tell me.
I am not stuck up. I merely have the years of training to give me the wisdom and understanding to see how childish such an act would be.
Childish? Is that a crack about my age? You ain't much older than me, Miss High and Mighty. Just 'cause you're some Jedi doesn't mean you can be a prissy little... What the... Hey, that wasn't funny.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Mission. Come now, we have to get going. Please, do try to be less clumsy in the future.
With Karth, Bastila and several other companions you meet on Taris, you'll be tasked with finding a way to escape the planet, to return to the Jedi Council on Dantooine. You get a whole section of the game on Taris, where you get slowly introduced to the game's overall technicalities, as well as get introduced into the lore. And it's at this point that you begin to understand how the game works, and whether or not the class you've chosen suits your particular playstyle. You also get to explore the planet at your pace, getting to know the culture and figuring out how to escape. Aside from Karth and Bastila, there are also a bunch of side characters who can join your party. Some of these are also quite interesting. My personal favourite probably being Canderous, a badass Mandalorian mercenary, who you come across in the Undercity of Taurus, working for a local crime lord.
We're getting out of here before I lose anyone else. I can't carry all this salvage back by myself. You'd be smart to get out of here as well.
Canderous is a character who perfectly sums up the morally ambiguous side of the game. He's a character who has no understanding whatsoever of the concept of good or evil. A veteran of the Mandalorian Wars, who after his people lost to the Republic, decided to take up work as a mercenary for the highest bidder. The more you talk to him and get to know him, the more you get the sense that he's joined your party simply for the challenge of it. He just wants to fight, and the quest gives him a reason to do so. What's cool about having Canderous in your party is that the more you get to know him, the more he opens up to you. And unlike the other characters who are a bit more emotionally involved in the plot, Canderous instead opts to tell you stories from his previous battles during the various wars he's been involved with, as well as some of his work as a mercenary.
I remember using a thermal generator to cause the outer layer of one of the asteroids to vaporize in a picosecond. It blew out and shredded the 3 smugglers using it for cover, but that was a mistake.
Some of these stories are very interesting too, and they really keep you hooked and leave you wanting to hear more. What's interesting about Canderous too is how he interacts with the other characters.
It must be embarrassing to be bested by a handful of street thugs.
There were extenuating circumstances, and I can assure you, it took far more than a handful of Vulkars to subdue me.
Whatever you say. All I know is that if we had more Jedi like Bastila fighting against us in the Mandalorian Wars, my side might not have lost.
Bold talk from a broken-down mercenary who was serving at Davik's heel. I'd call you his pet cat-hound, but they have enough loyalty not to turn on their masters.
Insults? Maybe if your master had trained your lightsaber to be as quick as your tongue, you could have escaped those Vulkars, you spoiled little Jedi princess.
I was not spoiled. I was given the same training as everyone else in the Order. You are nothing but No, I must not do this. There is no emotion. There is peace.
That's the problem with you Jedi. Always chanting about peace and control. Never up for a good fight.
For example, he and Karth are basically the exact opposite of one another. They both fought on opposing sides of the Mandalorian Wars, and both have extremely different opinions on the conflict, and what impact it had on them. Having both of them in your party will sometimes trigger a conversation between them.
The horrors of war? My people know only the glory of battle. I'm disappointed in you, Karth. I thought a warrior like you would understand.
I'm not a warrior, I'm a soldier. There's a difference. Warriors attack and conquer, they prey on the weak. Soldiers defend and protect the innocent, mostly from warriors.
Nice speech. I bet you tell yourself that every night so you can sleep. But I accept who and what I am. I don't have to justify it with words. Victory in battle is my justification.
Justification through victory. So what happens when you lose? You know, like you did against us.
You had us outnumbered 5-1. You had more ships, more troops, more supplies, and the Jedi on your side. And we still made the Republic tremble before we fell.
Nice speech. I bet you tell yourself that every night so you can sleep. I don't want to talk about this anymore, Canderous. The war is over.
In fact, that's another thing that helps to make the game feel so much more dynamic. Depending on which companions you have in your party, you can randomly trigger these conversations, and some interesting discussions can occur between various characters. Some of them even allow you to chime in with your opinion from time to time. Again, this does its bit to make the game feel so much more dynamic and less formulaic. Some of the conversations between the characters are really interesting too, and some of them really took me by surprise.
Would Revan and Malak still have been corrupted if the Council had supported them instead of dragging its feet?
Do not blame Revan's corruption on the Council. Your Republic saw only the threat of the Mandalorians, but the wisdom of the Masters saw beyond the immediate threat. There was something lurking out there. Something that devoured Revan and Malak, and many other Jedi. Had the Council sent us all into the unknown, how many more would have fallen?
So you're saying we should have done nothing? Just let the Mandalorians conquer us unopposed?
Another addition to this is that having certain characters in your party during a particular conversation with an NPC can sometimes offer you a perk, unlocking some unique dialogue to help you during a particular persuasion or a particular negotiation. This is awesome.
Never underestimate a Mandalorian. If I want, there won't be enough of you left to identify.
In addition to these characters whose backstories and moral standards are pretty clear, you have other characters who are a bit more mysterious, such as Jolee, an old Jedi hermit who you find hidden away in the Shadowlands of Kashyyyk. Jolee is a character whose motivations and intentions are very unclear. He's not a Sith, but at the same time, he seems completely opposed to the Jedi Order, considering himself more of a grey character. Some of the conversations you can have with him are fascinating, and really thought-provoking. The more you learn about his backstory, the more sense his attitude towards you makes.
I'm allowed to be enigmatic when I want to be.
Sadly though, not all the game's potential companions are as interesting. For example, one character who I hated was Juhani. Juhani basically spends the entire game whining and complaining, and giving you sob stories trying to make you feel sorry for her. Or at least that's how it came across to me. She repeats herself constantly during these conversations, and her dialogue is just so boring. Yeah, I really couldn't stand that character. What's funny about it too is that the other characters in the game don't seem to like her either.
Giving you a second chance like this is a clear sign of weakness. Sometimes I find it hard to believe the Jedi could defeat my people in battle.
Thankfully, even the developers seem to agree. You can actually execute her early in the game and get rid of her. And believe me, I wouldn't blame you if you did. You also get a Wookiee in your party, a Twi'lek kid, and a couple of droids. One of which being most people's personal favourite character, the trigger-happy, sociopathic, protocol/assassin droid, HK-47. Seriously, HK-47 is absolutely hilarious. One of the most memorable and quotable characters in the whole game.
Commentary. I say we blast the meatbag and save you the trouble, Master.
What's with all the droids lately? My wife get to you too?
Negative. I just don't like organic meatbags. Except for the Master, of course.
Fans liked him so much they brought him back for the sequel. So yeah, the game has a whole bunch of interesting and memorable characters, as well as several companions. You can have 2 companions in your party at any given time, and can switch between them from the pause menu, depending on where you are in the levels. For the vast majority of the game, I personally had Carth and Jolee in my party. Carth appeared to be the best from long range, and Jolee had a lightsaber, as well as some pretty effective force abilities, including healing your entire party. I just found them to be the most practical to have in the party. Another thing the game has to offer is its overall RPG elements, as well as the many different and nuanced ways to approach combat. The game has a ton of weapons to choose from, including both melee weapons and ranged weapons. Certain characters are more effective with certain types of weapons than others. Early in the game you'll be relying on vibro swords for melee combat, and various different types of blasters for ranged attacks. You can buy weapons or find them scattered in containers around the game, as well as taken from fallen enemies. In addition to these weapons, you also have several throw-in weapons, such as grenades of various kinds. I would advise saving these for some of the tougher battles in the game, such as bosses, since some of these are very challenging, and these weapons can bail you out at times. In addition to weapons, you can also acquire armor and utility items, such as energy shields, as well as various items, such as belts and armbands, that give you certain enhancements. You can even get items that increase your skills in certain areas, such as stealth and computer use. These can be very useful at times, and can be used by certain members of your party. Thankfully the game does have a crafting system of sorts, and both your weapons and armor can be upgraded at a workbench. when you have the right materials to do so. This is quite fun to do since you can mess around with different weapons and armour, and choose which ones to upgrade. At a certain point in the game, after the first act, you unlock a lightsaber, and your character becomes a Jedi Padawan. This is where the game starts to get really interesting, and the combat improves drastically. You'll find yourself using the lightsaber pretty much exclusively from this point on, since it's the most powerful weapon in the game by far, and this seems consistent with Star Wars lore, so it makes sense. There are even different kinds of lightsabers in the game. You can choose your blade's colour when you first build it, and you can customise this by finding saber crystals scattered around the game. The saber crystals are somewhat rare, but you will find them at certain predetermined points in the game. Just like with the other weapons, you can customise and upgrade your lightsaber. You can also find double-bladed lightsabers and use them if you want to. You can also choose to wield two lightsabers if you want to. This adds so much more depth to the game's combat and makes it so much fun. In addition to gaining a lightsaber, you also gain force powers. And as I mentioned before, some of them are exclusive to the light side, some of them are exclusive to the dark side, and some of them can be used by both sides. Many of these force powers can really give you an advantage in combat, and it's fun to level them up as you play the game, and find out which ones work best for you. The bulk of the game's story involves you and your party travelling across the galaxy, looking for mysterious items called star maps, in order to find out what Malak and the Sith are planning, and find a way to stop them. To do this, at a certain point in the game, you unlock your own ship, and you can take that ship to different planets in the Star Wars universe. Each of these planets will have their own areas to explore, as well as their own culture and characters to interact with. Each of them has their own visual style and aesthetic. Being an RPG, the game is filled with side quests, each of them very interesting, and for the most part these are optional. Choosing what to do in these side quests will also affect the way that certain members of your party respond to you, depending on their own personalities and worldviews. It's really fun to travel across the galaxy and see what each of the game's planets have to offer. You can even find yourself in the middle of complex, political conflicts, such as an internal dispute between a Wookiee tribe on Kashyyyk, or an ongoing battle between the Zerka Corporation and the Sand People on Tatooine. These conflicts usually have multiple ways to resolve them, and they feel very dynamic, and you genuinely feel as if the world around you is being affected by your choices. There's even a quest where you can act as an arbiter in a court case with a Republic war veteran being charged with murder, and you have to investigate the crime to uncover the truth. And what's cool about this is that you can actually choose how the case is resolved, and there's some moral ambiguity with it. One of the planets you visit, Korriban, even has you infiltrating a Sith training academy while disguised as a student, and this whole level is brutal. You can actually convince some of the students to leave the academy and turn back to the light. It takes speech skills, but you can do it.
Yes. Well, I see what you mean. I've never been on that side of the fence before.
It's certainly possible. It's actually quite satisfying to delve into that foul place and save as many people from the dark side as you can. In short, the game's story and RPG elements truly are great. This is a game where everything seems to fit together really well. Everything from the main plot, which is fantastic, to the excellent side quests, and even the fun mini-games. It all seems to fit together very well, and nothing feels out of place. You can explore the game at your own pace, and choose what planet to visit first, and which quest to undertake. Most of the side quests in the game are entirely optional, but they can help you to unlock rewards, as well as experience that may be necessary to complete the game. Plus, as I mentioned before, many of them have multiple endings, as well as different dialogue choices, adding to the replay value. The main plot itself also has multiple endings, that will mostly depend on whether you choose the light side or the dark side. So you get your standard good ending and bad ending. Will you become a noble Jedi warrior and a hero of the Republic, or the Dark Lord of the Sith? You decide. There are also a few interesting twists and turns in the story along the way, and certain characters do things that you really won't expect. The game has plenty of enemy variety. In fact, there's probably more enemy variety here than in any other Star Wars game. Each planet has their own enemy creatures, as well as factions and gangs you have to deal with. As I mentioned before, once you get used to the game's combat, it becomes a lot of fun. You can also issue commands to the members of your party during combat, and you can even assume direct control of them, making the combat a bit more interactive. The game also has plenty of boss battles. You take on several powerful characters throughout the game, many of which are Sith and Dark Jedi, others are simply powerful creatures. The boss battles are pretty awesome. Some of them are really challenging too, particularly if you haven't leveled up much yet. The final battle against Darth Malak was a blast. A really intense battle, which is quite challenging if you're not prepared for it. So yeah, the game, despite being more of a story-based RPG, it still has plenty of combat and interesting boss battles. I mentioned before that the game has mini-games. At certain points in the story, as well as travelling between planets, you get turret sections. You can take control of the Ebon Hawk's gun turrets and take out incoming fighters. These turret sections are pretty fun, if a bit simplistic. You can also take part in swoop races, which are similar to pod races. There are a few planets where you can do this, and winning races and breaking records can earn you credits. This is quite fun to do. Some of them are very challenging though, but aside from one point in the story, they're entirely optional. Another minigame you have is Pazak, which is a card game that you can play with various characters around the game. You can have friendly games, or you can play for money. Again, this is really fun to do, and it helps to break the potential of any monotony of the game. The game also has a fantastic soundtrack, with music that suits each level perfectly. One of the things that surprised me about the game when I first played it was that rather than stick with the usual Star Wars music from the movies, which seemed to be the norm for Star Wars games at the time, this game actually has its own original soundtrack, composed by none other than the legendary Jeremy Soule, who of course famously composed the soundtrack for some of the Elder Scrolls games, as well as the Harry Potter games and many others. Unsurprisingly, his soundtrack here is epic. I particularly like Darth Malak's theme music. Speaking of Darth Malak, I personally think he's one of the most intimidating and memorable Star Wars villains, who like Darth Vader also has a tragic backstory and is deeply complex.
The fleet is assembling around the Starforge and awaits your instructions.
Patience, Commander. My new apprentice is nearly ready.
Despite everything the character does throughout the game, I actually felt sorry for him at the end. Very interesting villain. So all in all, Knights of the Old Republic is a pretty awesome game, and it's hard to believe that the game is now 20 years old. And as far as I'm concerned, aside from the original Battlefront 2 game from 2005, there hasn't been a Star Wars game since that was anywhere near as good in my personal opinion. But it's good to revisit this one from time to time. It's a game that I can see you enjoying if you like old school RPGs, with complex leveling up systems, and lots of dialogue and choices, because this is one of the most well-made RPGs of all time in my opinion. I give Knights of the Old Republic a solid 10 out of 10. It's hard to find any serious criticisms of the game. Thanks for watching guys. Stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews. Once again, I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.